Hello again, and welcome back to the composition blog. It's been, I think, a little over 2 weeks since I last filmed, and for about a week and a half of that I've been blocked quite badly. Yeah, I haven't actually been through a period like this in quite some time, not since I was working as a web developer, and I found it used to take me a week for every month I'd been working to actually find my brain again. Yeah, so it was kind of weird to go back to that because it's been a number of years since it's been that bad. But it was quite good for sort of thinking about, well, how do I deal with this? And yeah, and actually sort of what can I do to keep things ticking along even if I'm not actually working. So what I did was basically I kept turning up here and well, I thought I was tidying, but as you can see it's still a disaster zone. Yeah, so clearly it wasn't actually tidying. I moved the furniture around because I'd been feeling for a little while that it was quite frustrating not having any areas of blank wall, because everything here has always had either furniture along it or a window or a heater, and there just wasn't any sort of wall if I wanted to just do something against the wall. So I've moved the piano round, and that's now sort of right directly to my right as opposed to along the wall to my right. And I've already been using the blank wall, so that's good. I did quite a lot of writing and sort of trying to do some drawing around ideas that have been stewing for a little while that haven't quite come to fruition, most of which are very bad, but sometimes you've got to do the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. Yeah, but basically after a week and a half of this kind of frustrating faffing about, it all came together, which was good. So I've actually done quite a bit of work now on the Britten Variations, which I mentioned I think about a couple of months ago for the first time, which, yeah, I've sort of come back to that after this immense gap, where I think I got a bit stuck because my cellist, Amy Jolly, this is a project for her PhD, which is looking at composer-performer collaborative relationships. But what she wanted too was for the piece that I'm writing for her to be relevant to my research as well. And I got a bit confused about what that should be and how to look at that in the context of having content predetermined being this theme by Britten. Yeah, and so way back then, which you may or may not recall, I was looking at different ways of looking at the score as an object in order to try and find a way into how I might vary it. And I was getting her to do things like turn the score upside down and just play and see what happened there. And another idea I had was to do multiple photocopies of the score to degrade it so that sections would become illegible and sort of what would come out of that. Which was quite frustrating at the time because photocopiers have improved immensely over the past few years, and I think it took 26 versions to get to something that had anything like being difficult to read. So I started from that point with this, and sort of as a way of getting back into it and a way of sort of trying to understand what I want to do with this piece, I made a number of drawings. The aim here was to identify the elements that seemed to be characteristic to me, thinking both in terms of the notation, but also sort of that idea of degraded score and sort of what's happened then to the physical score that might be taken to be characteristic. And so the first 3 drawings I started from using a solvent transfer of the degraded score and just putting bits of that onto the paper and then working over that with ink and oil pastels. The 4th drawing is a little bit different in that I wanted to just work with those ideas that had come up through the previous 3 drawings without using the solvent transfer, without using sort of any direct reference to the score. That I felt was not quite so useful, but it was sort of more a solidifying of those ideas that had come out of it. So the elements that seemed characteristic to me through this process, there's a repeated quaver figure which I kept coming back to, which stood out visually much more than other parts of the score. It's not retained its regularity really, I think. It's a lot perhaps looser in idea, it lacks a context. with the drawing, which is quite good, I think, because that's sort of a bit freeing. Not quite sure how to proceed with that yet, but it's, yeah, there's ideas coming, and in the context of the other things that were found, so the photocopying brings in these sort of masses of dots and little sort of wavery lines as well, that don't actually have a connection to the notation at all. It's simply artifacts in the photocopying that sort of turned into these things. The drawing itself sort of gives an idea of layering, and what I found as I was doing the drawing, in particular with the smearing, that gesture of smearing over and over again, I felt it had an affinity with that quaver rhythm that I might want to play on at some point. So sort of been thinking about too how this piece might relate to my own research and sort of ideas that sort of came up during the progression assessment process. And another thing I've been doing to get back into work has been to sort of reinstate my regular PhD reading, which got a bit lost in all the writing and the deadlines and the travel and so forth. So it's been really good to get back to that as a regular thing. And so one of the things that sort of came up was the idea of composer presence. And initially that had been composer presence in the studio, as you see me now. But then I was sort of also thinking with this about composer presence in the piece, and what is that? What might that be? And it sort of led to a possible recasting of this piece more as a duet for composer and performer, where my part is a video shot in the studio and edited in the studio, that then interacts with Amy's live cello part in the performance space. So I sent this idea off to Amy, and an idea that she came back with was that the video might not necessarily have to be, you know, giant video on a screen, but could actually be quite small, perhaps, for an intimate audience, like a small venue, and the audience could be quite close, which I quite liked, actually, the idea that perhaps the scales of her and me would be similar, at least, if not the same. Yeah, and so I was thinking about how to do that. If everything's so small, obviously one really needs to be quite close. And yeah, and so I came up with this idea of sort of shooting confessional style videos, sort of tracking the progress of the piece, and my ideas for it. And so I've been using my lovely new blank wall, and just running some tests, and because I do have a blank wall, I then had this idea, sort of rapidly, going off into strange directions here, that I could do some sort of chroma keying, because I'd filmed the making of the drawings, and to somehow pull that in, that kind of footage, as part of the composer part. Yeah, and so I had this idea to basically green screen in that drawing behind me, and I was thinking, oh good, nice blank wall. And yeah, and so I shot some test footage, and I mean, the specific thing I was looking for with this test one is that I was thinking, actually, you know, I need to think about what I'm wearing, and so I was wearing a grey t-shirt that day, and I thought, okay, well, that's likely to blend into the wall, isn't it? So I shot it to, being fairly certain that the t-shirt would just blend into the wall, and we'd get kind of, yeah, drawing all over everything but my face. What I hadn't expected was to find that apparently I'm lilac. And yeah, I seemed to blend into the wall when I did this, and yeah, that was unexpected and a bit peculiar. So today I kind of want to test out, I think, of clothing, colour contrast. I had this idea. Yeah, I think not really viable for a full piece, much as I quite like the weirdness of it. Yeah, so I think I'm going to have to get a proper green screen if I'm to pull that off, and so the whole thing has stalled a little bit while I decide, do I really want to do this? What will it contribute? If I don't have it, what is that going to look like? How is that going to affect the piece? Is it going to be better or not as interesting. Yeah, so I still need to work that out, and that's something I kind of need to do this afternoon, I think, because if I'm going to do it, I really want to have that by the weekend, and so I can start work on that on Saturday or Sunday. Yeah, but it feels like I got a lot done in just a few days on that, from a point of having done nothing for 2 months or so, which was great. It was really, really nice to be back on that, and to be able to send Amy some stuff. I still don't have any notes for her. Hoping she'll get some notes in a couple of weeks, just something to play around with and sort of interact with a rough idea of the video, and to start thinking about how the sound is going to interact. I pulled out the viola again as part of this session where I was testing the confessional video setup. Because I was thinking actually it could be quite a nice thing to include. I mean, I have been doing quite a lot of playing the viola recently, and it's my only string instrument. I don't have access to a cello. It will probably be one of the key tools I use for working out approaches in some way for this piece, for the sonic side of things. But equally, because the strings are so old, and I've been over all this before, and the sound is not a classic viola sound, and can't be, it could be quite an interesting counterpoint to have an idea about, okay, I've got this sort of idea, and then to have that played on the cello, which obviously is in much better condition and played by a much better performer. To have that contrast might be interesting, sort of the development and the execution at the end. Yeah, so there's things to test out there. There's a lot to play with, but at the moment we're right in the middle of rehearsals for our next Bastard Assignments gig, which is happening next Friday, the 15th of June, at Block 336 Gallery in Brixton. Yeah, so there's not been a lot of time to keep working on the Britten Variations this week. Next week, again, we've got another 3 days of rehearsal. So after that, I'll probably get some time to really come back to this, but I kind of want everything to be set up and ready to go at that point, and to have hopefully done another couple of tests in the interim. For that next gig, I've definitely decided that the POV images, which are the result of the Memoire performances, they're going to be up on the wall at that gig in some form. At the moment I'm talking to 336 about how to get them up there as prints. There may be, yeah, it may be a mixture of prints and projection. If it all goes horribly wrong and turns out to be prohibitively expensive to get all the printing done, which it may, depending on the size of the room, which I haven't got the dimensions of yet, then it may be projection and projection on either end, or even just projection on one end. But they're going to go up in some form, which is really nice actually. I'm really glad to be able to do that, because it's nice to have a bit of kind of closure, I think, on this piece, because it was theoretical for so long, and then I got these images and I really like them, but it's kind of hard to know what to do with them. So this week, in gaps in rehearsal and immensely long commutes, I've been digging through all the images from the Asylum performance and the Floodhouse Chicago performance, and pulling together a set for each performance of images that I feel are strong, and which I like. Yes, and it's proving harder than I thought actually, because part of the thing is that the images are all different. They're all different cameras. The light settings change as you move around the venue. Sometimes the flash goes off, sometimes it doesn't. Some of them are really blurry and abstract. Some of them have a colour cast on them. Some of them are crystal clear and show a whole lot of detail. And you get all these within a single set from a performance, and so it's very, very varied and it's kind of hard to work out what the character is for any given performance. And so I've been sort of tossing up with ways of segmenting that. Do I just keep, do I decide just that the Chicago ones are going to be all completely abstract? Do I decide that the Asylum ones are all going to have some recognizable feature? That was sort of my first thought, which I'm gradually moving away from, I think, because I think it's not going to be that interesting to see. I think it's actually more interesting to see a mix of clear-cut and abstract. But yeah, I'm just sort of trying to get my head around how to think through these variations within a set, and how to display that in such a way that it makes sense. So to help with that, yesterday, while I had a bit of downtime during rehearsal, I started slapping together a website, which I had been thinking of for this anyway, because there's so many images. I may not be able to get them all printed up anyway, just because of cost. And so it seemed like a nice thing to have a place where they'd all be together. Yeah, so I've started doing that, and it's also sort of helping me think through what these sets are and how does the variation work within the set. Yeah, so I'm still working on that. It might be a couple of weeks until that's ready. Once it is, of course, I'll announce it here and there'll be a link. But for the moment it's just work in progress and a way of helping me think through how I'm actually going to display these next week. So I need to get the print order off pretty soon though, if I'm going to get things printed, obviously. Yeah, and that's quite exciting actually. I'm really, really excited to see them in print. I think that'd be great. Yeah, hopefully it'll work. So that's about it for the fortnight. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. And I'll see you again in another couple of weeks. Thanks. Bye.